Medicare for all. Some say it's a bad idea. New reaction to Senator Bernie Sanders' new healthcare plan. And what a former pope says is behind the sexual abuse scandals plaguing the church. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The president sees good things ahead for the United States and North Korea, but says it'll take some time. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. President Trump wants to jumpstart talks with North Korea, acknowledging today his last summit with Kim Jong-un did not go as well as he'd hoped. To help get those nuclear talks back on track, South Korean President Moon Jae-in was at the White House today to discuss ways to strengthen relations across the Korean Peninsula. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy has the details. Ben?
Well, John, Jenna, President Trump confirmed today he's hoped for a third summit could actually happen with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. He called the relationship strong, adding that hopefully it will end in a great solution for the world. With so much attention on the North, South Korea's leader wanted to meet face-to-face with President Trump for a number of reasons.
The relationship is a much different relationship than it was 2 years ago.
That relationship is important to President Moon, as is rekindling negotiations between Kim Jong-un and Trump after their Vietnam summit ended with no agreement. Trump demands the North get rid of all nuclear weapons in exchange for lifting sanctions.
I think that sanctions are right now at a level that's a fair level, and I really believe something very significant is going to happen. We could always increase them, but I didn't want to do that at this time.
Today, Moon said he does not view the Hanoi summit as a failure, but part of a longer process with the North.
It's step by step. I enjoyed the summits. I enjoy being with the chairman. I think it's been very productive.
Trump also discussed the potential for smaller deals and even sending humanitarian aid like food across the border to help. For more insight on today's meeting in the Oval Office, I spoke with Olivia Enos from the Heritage Foundation. Take a listen.
I think the focus today is really going to be about North Korea and a lot less on the alliance itself, which frankly, there have been a number of hiccups, a number of bumps in the road that have been hit between the U.S. and South Korea. So my hope is that not only is there, a strong focus on North Korea, but hopefully there's also a focus on shoring up the alliance relationship.
Now, Moon last visited the White House all the way back in May of last year. Jenna?
And Ben, if there is a third meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the stakes have got to be higher, right?
Oh, yeah, Jenna, absolutely. The stakes would definitely be higher for a third summit. America and its allies want to see concrete proof that North Korea is making efforts to denuclearize.
So far, neither Singapore nor Hanoi have delivered on what many in Washington had hoped would be tangible steps toward complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear program.
Olivia, you're talking about maximum pressure. Trump demanded complete denuclearization in exchange for lifting any sanctions. What are the odds either side is willing to budge?
That's the really tricky question here. A lot of people question whether or not North Korea is even interested in denuclearizing, but I think that the U.S. needs to continue to put that pressure on if they have any hopes of doing so, because I think it is going to require coercion. It is going to require Kim Jong-un to change his risk calculus for there to be any forward movement in that regard.
Right now, Trump said we're focused on the big deal, which is the North getting rid of its nuclear weapons. And in the meantime, sanctions will remain in place as talks continue.
All right, Ben Kennedy, White House correspondent, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is facing conspiracy charges here in the United States for conspiring to download classified databases. The charge stems from helping Chelsea Manning access Defense Department computers back in 2010. This comes after Assange was arrested today at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he's been taking refuge for the last 7 years. But his asylum was revoked. Now the U.S. wants to extradite Assange to face his charges here, which Assange's attorneys plan to challenge.
We will be fighting extradition, and he'll be brought before the court again within the next month.
Assange's lawyers say his participation in leaking government secrets is journalistic, not criminal. But North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer tells CBN News he sees it differently.
What he's accused of doing is very scary. And we should never confuse First Amendment expressions of religious or political speech with what he's done. It's a right in the Constitution. It's not a license to harm the United States of America.
The Justice Department adding today, Assange is responsible for, quote, one of the largest compromises of classified information in the history of the United States.
Well, Chief Political Analyst David Brody is here now. David, what kind of impact has Assange had on the political system here in America?
Well, two things. Let's start with Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump talked all the time in 2016. I love WikiLeaks. That doesn't look good at all now. I mean, major egg on the face for Donald Trump here, because you have the United States government, in essence, wanting to bring him here to the United States on charges of conspiracy. This is Donald Trump's White House and United States government overall. So that's a problem for Trump. But overall, on American politics, look, this has always been an argument between the free press and national security and the balance between the two. Here's the key difference with Assange. Is he really part of the free press? Is he really part of this media organization that we hear so much about? WikiLeaks describes themselves as a media organization. Many others say not only are they not a media organization, they are out to undermine national security, and he's got contacts with Russia, and that's the difference.
All right, David, we want to get your thoughts on a couple of other topics. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
All right. Well, health care is emerging as the first major campaign issue of the 2020 election. Today, Republicans and even some Democrats are pushing back against Bernie Sanders' plan to eliminate private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson joins us with more on the backlash for what he's calling Medicare for All. Abigail?
Well, polls show Sanders as the early leader among Democrat presidential candidates. And now that his big plan is out, Sanders' primary opponents are either fighting it or trying to get a piece of the action. Bernie's big pitch.
Together, we are going to end the international embarrassment of the United States of America, our great country, being the only major nation on earth not to guarantee health care to all as a right.
Is setting the stage for a 2020 drama.
I don't agree with Senator Sanders' the single-payer approach.
While some Democrats are backing away from Medicare for All.
It could be a possibility in the future.
Others are embracing it.
Healthcare must be a right, not a privilege.
Kirsten Gillibrand is one of 4 Senate Democrats running for president who backs the idea.
This has to become the next social safety net. It has to become something that is there for you no matter what.
That safety net could prove dangerously expensive. Independent estimates put the plan costing anywhere from $25 to $35 trillion over just 10 years.
That price is so steep that even left-leaning analysts are quietly admitting that the tax burden is virtually certain to land on the middle class.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell could bring the bill to the Senate floor to make a point.
It might be interesting to put a Medicare for All plan on the floor for a vote, see where Democrats really stand.
Republicans like North Dakota's Kevin Cramer say a vote would showcase divisions among Democrats.
They will quickly gravitate back closer to the middle where reality exists.
Under the plan, some 180 million Americans would see their private health insurance replaced with a public plan.
What you end up with is you don't have Medicare for all. You have a bunch of people that have inferior or no coverage.
The White House says Republicans are working on realistic solutions. President Trump says a really great health care plan will be ready right after the 2020 election.
I personally think there's some risk in that approach.
Indiana Republican Mike Braun says his party has to come up with a fix for a basket case health care system.
We've got to be unveiling it and building it into 2020. And maybe the formal presentation can be after 2020.
Medicare for All is shaping up to be the Obamacare of 2020. Meanwhile, McConnell says the Republican plan isn't ready for prime time. But the GOP may want to consider changing their timetable to seize an opportunity, especially with Democrats currently divided on how to fix health care.
Abigail, I would imagine if Leader McConnell puts Medicare for All up for a vote, it's to put Democrats on the record. How likely will it be that he does that?
That's right, John. Now, we know that some Republicans think that would be a great idea. McConnell has not said one way or the other whether or not he will do this, and we've already heard from a few Democrat senators who say they would likely do what they did when he brought the Green New Deal up for a vote, and that is we would see Democrat senators vote present and not give in to what they say would be a political stunt. But there are definitely Republicans, since this will be such a big issue on the 2020 campaign trail, who want to see McConnell bring it to the floor for a vote to get senators on the record, particularly I think it's 4, maybe even a few more presidential candidates who are sponsoring this bill. They want to see if they would vote for it when it's on the Senate floor.
And Abby, real quickly here, back to Obamacare. If the Affordable Care Act falters in the courts, do Republicans have a replacement plan in place?
Right now, they do not, but they say that they are working on that, and that is what President Trump is. I know he's been talking to a couple Republican senators here on the Hill, and they want to get something put together that President Trump says that they will unveil and vote on after the 2020 election. But as Senator Braun says, he wants to see something possibly come out a little sooner, since health care is going to be a big issue on the next 2 years.
Abigail Robertson reporting on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Abby. Well, sticking with the theme of Obamacare, the Trump administration's challenge to the Affordable Care Act is getting fast-tracked to the Supreme Court. A federal appeals court ruling expedited oral arguments in the case. They'll now take place in early July of this year. That means questions on the legality of the Affordable Care Act could be answered when the High Court issues opinions in June of 2020. So the fate of Obamacare would be decided just months before Americans vote on the next president. Healthcare is already expected to be a dominant issue in the race for the White House.
Vice President Mike Pence is responding to presidential hopeful Pete Buttigieg's criticism of his personal beliefs, telling CNBC, quote, he said some things that are critical of my Christian faith and about me personally, and he knows better, he knows me. Pence and Buttigieg worked together when Pence was governor of Indiana. Buttigieg is the mayor of South Bend. Well, 2020 candidates are vying for the support of young voters. 5 Democratic hopefuls announcing today they will participate in a televised town hall where college students get to ask the questions. Mayor Pete, Senator Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders will all take part. Official DNC rules say the candidates can't all appear on the same stage until the debate season begins. So on April 22nd, they will all hold back-to-back town halls at Harvard. They'll be shown on CNN. According to Harvard, millennials and Generation Z voters will make up more than a third of voters in the 2020 election.
David Brody back with us. David, let's talk about young voters. Millennials are expected to overtake the boomer generation in size by the time they go to the polls in 2020. So how crucial is it for candidates to win over millennials and Generation Z?
It is absolutely crucial. You mentioned 1/3. Here's the thing. If you look at just Americans overall, millennials and Gen Zs make up more than half the electorate. Not the voting electorate, though. That's the difference. Right. So they make up half the electorate. But when it comes to voting, that's the challenge. So can you get them to the voting booth? That has always been the challenge. And it's a question the Democrats are going to have to answer. Do they want to go for those blue-collar Democrats that are kind of reliable voters and get them back from Trump? Or do they want to go with the millennials and cast their lot with them?
Right. When it comes to health care and this whole debate over Medicare for all, it seems like that is an issue that really resonates with a lot of these younger voters.
Absolutely, especially compared, obviously, to the rest of Americans. Have a look at some of the statistics that we found out there. We just made these up. No, we didn't make them up. Here we go. 56% of all Americans support Medicare for all right now. That's roughly the polling there. But look at millennials. 69% of millennials support Medicare for all. Now, this is interesting. For the Medicare for all debate, when you term it Medicare for all, 62% of folks all across the country, not just millennials, support it. But look at this. When you call it socialized medicine, only 44% support the same. It's the same thing in terms of what the plan is. But if you call it something different, the percentage drops. And also, look at this. If you say that Medicare for all is going to reduce premiums, hey, 67% support that. Oh, you say it increases your taxes, 36% support Medicare for all. So it's all about the messaging and how each side tries to get through on that.
On the theme of young voters, we've reported here on Faith Nation about college campuses and conservative discrimination. How much does that affect the right's ability to get their message out?
I think it's very important, and it's been an issue for a very long time. It's not just conservative bigwigs kind of on campuses, and we have some of those bigwigs that we've talked about time and time again. We've done stories on them, as a matter of fact, Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens. These are household names now at this point. Ann Coulter, she's pretty far right, obviously, and Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA. As a matter of fact, Turning Point USA, actually, the whole organization itself has been banned by quite a few college campuses. So it's not just these big star media folks, it's actual organizations having a hard time getting traction.
Now, we talked about health care, but what are some of the other issues, David, that are really big among young voters?
Well, here's what's interesting. Education is really important to young voters, and income inequality is also important, but here's the rub. That's not what gets them to the polls. So what gets them to the polls, things like climate change, reproductive rights is very important, immigration, social issues, those type of things seem to be motivating millennials, Gen X, did I say it right? Gen Z. I'm sorry, I get all my alphabet confused. Gen Z and millennials. So those are the key parts of what that most of the Democrats are going to be honing in on, which we've already seen in 2020.
David Brody, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, we explain why a former pope breaks his silence to address the Catholic Church when we come back. Pope Benedict says the sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church is a result of the sexual revolution of the 1960s. In a rare break from silence since retiring, the former pontiff writes the 60s brought about a change in moral standards, and that, quote, there were individual bishops who rejected the Catholic tradition as a whole and sought to bring about a kind of new, modern Catholicity. Benedict's letter, which was published today in the German magazine for priests, also laments the lack of religious belief in today's society, saying, quote, why did pedophilia reach such proportions ultimately? The reason is the absence of God.
Well, the issue of sexual abuse not only affects the Catholic Church. With the rise of the Me Too movement came Church Too. People coming forward to talk about their experiences with sexual abuse from several different denominations. I traveled to St. Louis to talk to a sexual abuse survivor who's on a mission to help victims see themselves in a different light. Kim and Monty Weatherall enjoy spending time together, whether it's in church or working out at the gym. She's helped him tackle weight loss.
80 pounds, yes. I walked in there well over 300. And upwards of 320 pounds.
And also in dealing with a painful past.
When I got home and he told me what his plan was, it hit me like a ton of bricks.
I made a decision to end my life.
Monty resisted getting help because as a pastor, he's used to giving advice. Most people in his life know Pastor Monty as a young, dynamic preacher, always armed with an encouraging word. What they didn't know was for years, he wore many masks, projecting different personas to hide a painful secret.
From 4 to 7 years old, I was abused over those 3 years by 2 male relatives.
He never told anyone about the abuse, fearing retribution. Instead, Monty hid the pain, pretending to be someone else.
For the rest of my life, I began to play these different characters because I was so uncomfortable with being myself.
It worked until the only character left was the man in the mirror.
I didn't realize that on some level I was blaming myself. But I had to give myself permission to realize that it wasn't my fault. That suicidal spirit that was on me, it just broke. But I knew that the journey wasn't over.
The road to recovery started on the outside with a goal of getting in shape to lay a foundation for his emotional healing.
I think psychologically, as I am being, tortured as a child by the abusers, I try to really just hide all of that. Being overweight, out of shape, I made a decision that a part of taking my life back, I had to take my body back.
Monty found a counselor and worked through difficult sessions, recalling those early childhood memories. And just like female victims, it took decades into adulthood to begin the process.
The majority of women that I see who are violated as a child really aren't ready to start the healing process till they're at least 30.
Sexual violence has got to go.
In the #MeToo era, sexual abuse scandals have now hit evangelical circles with its own social media campaign, #ChurchToo.
I regretfully had a sexual incident with a female high school senior in the church.
Challenging as it may be, Wheeler believes these revelations can help churches do better to address sexual abuse and reach victims.
What we are seeing is the community as a whole starting to at least willing to talk about this conversation. We're seeing that churches are now, I think the Me Too movement is helping some pastors realize that, oh my gosh, we do have a lot of survivors in our churches, and what are we doing and what can we do to help them heal?
That question is what motivates Monty Weatherall.
I know the shame, I know the courage that it took for those women and those men that are coming out to say this happened to me.
With so much interest in justice reform and redemption stories, he's concerned about neglecting the victim.
I'm glad that legislation is happening. I'm glad when authentic redemption has taken place. That's great, but we can't forget those boys, those girls, those men, those women that have been abused. And so I know why the Holy Spirit led me to write this book, for that reason.
That book, Taking My Life Back, documents how Monty went from suicidal thoughts
We are healed right now
to thriving and even forgiving his abusers.
For me, it started with a decision. I had to make a decision to forgive those that sexually abused me. And my abusers, they didn't know who I was going to become. They didn't know I would become a pastor that would help thousands. They didn't know I would even witness to them and lead them to Christ and baptize one of them.
For Kim, she says their marriage is stronger and they're happier than ever.
Sometimes I look at him and I don't even think it's the same person I married. He was wonderful then, but he's wonderful and healthy and whole now.
As difficult as it is for people like Pastor Monty to come forward, their decision not only sheds light on the depths of sexual abuse, it also helps other victims know there's hope and healing.
Coming up, a look at Cory Booker's legislation that could help compensate descendants of slaves in America.
I am Region's first ROTC graduate student.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
Reparations for slavery could become a big talking point heading into the 2020 election. Senator Cory Booker is jumping out ahead of others in the Democratic field by exploring the issue early on.
That's right. Booker this week released a bill in the Senate aimed at researching the best way to compensate descendants of slaves. The presidential hopeful says the measure will bring together the best minds to figure out how, quote, to right the economic scales of past harms.
Though it could be a big talking point in 2020, Washington Post political analyst Eugene Scott says the majority of Americans are not on board.
Most Americans don't support reparations. Like 70% of white Americans don't. Only about 50% of black Americans support reparations. And so the desire for reparations is a more progressive idea. However, income inequality is a pretty mainstream Democratic concern. And when you look at income inequality based on race, most academics and sociologists and historians and economics directly point to the wealth gap between black and white Americans going back to slavery. And so talking about income inequality without talking about slavery and systemic segregation, it's not something that I think the Democratic candidates are going to be able to get around. The question is reparations going to be the answer?
And that's a question Georgetown University is asking. The school's storied history is stained with the slave trade. Today, students held a vote on adding a tuition fee that would go toward a reparations fund.
The fee would cost students $20.27 per semester and would fund projects in underprivileged communities where slave descendants now live.
Well, as he just said, the statistics don't seem to support reparations, but it's definitely probably going to be a talker.
Yeah, we'll see if the other candidates jump on board with this or if it's kind of goes by the wayside.
Okay. Well, that's a wrap for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.